being joined by Meia Nouwens, who is a senior fellow at the IISS and a senior fellow for Chinese security and defense policy. Meia, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today. Beginning with the visit itself, what do you make of the visit? How significant is it given that it comes after 5 years? And in those 5 years, we've seen a lot of trouble between Europe and China.
Well, I think he has a couple of messages. I think the number of countries that he's chosen, and in particular which countries he's chosen to visit, is quite significant. Clearly, with France, he's trying to make bids to show that China still has relations with some of the most powerful European countries and capitals within the European Union. France, of course, is pursuing some trade ties with China. Macron's visit to Beijing recently made some progress in that respect, but very little of it actually came out of the meeting that they had in Paris and in France. But nevertheless, for Beijing, this is really a signal to show that Beijing still has an in with some key European capitals. And then, of course, there was the visit to Serbia and Hungary, and I think that's a different message. In particular, I think it's a signal that China still has some level of relationship with European countries on issues like the Belt and Road Initiative, which otherwise haven't been very popular in recent years. And second of all, of course, that China is courting countries that are in some ways closer to Russia. And that in itself is a signal to Brussels. I think a key message that was interesting that President Xi told Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, was, we are looking to you to become a more powerful member of the European Union and more powerful country in Europe. That should tell us a lot.
Right. Okay, let's just then first speak about Russia. We do know that there has been a lot of engagement when it comes to how to stop the war. The economies within Europe have had a huge trouble. Resources are depleted. There isn't much that Europe is being able to do. In such a scenario, Xi Jinping being in Europe, engaging the European Commission as also leaders of Europe, how do you see the role that they think Xi Jinping could have in stopping the Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, I think Europe remains committed to supporting Ukraine in its defense against Russia's invasion and its illegal war. Of course, there is an element here whereby Europe, and in particular countries like France, have played an important role, Germany as well, and the Netherlands, when they visit Beijing, to signal to China and to President Xi that they would, to stress upon him that they would like China to not support Russia in ways that help Russia continue its war of aggression against Ukraine. That is definitely an important message that they're signaling. To date, of course, China has remained cautious in how far it will go to support Russia's economy and indeed its defense industry. But nevertheless, Europe would like to see China do more.
Right. But Meia, there has been trouble when it comes to the relationship of China and the European world. We've seen Italy exit from the Belt and Road Initiative. There are problems and niggling areas with various other European countries. Cybersecurity is a huge problem, particularly with the United Kingdom. How do you see the engagement that both are seeking? Is it going to be advantage China or advantage the European nations? How do you see this go from here?
Well, I think European countries are still trying to balance their relationships with China. It's true that I think they're becoming more outspoken about some of the challenges that China poses to their national security. For example, you mentioned the cyber attacks. Certainly in the UK, that's been a topic of conversation very recently with a reported cyber attack by PRC-linked entities on the UK's Ministry of Defence. However, I would say that for Europe, China, of course, is still an important market to trade with. And here there is a tension between the business interests in Europe and the national security interests that governments are trying to grapple with. And there you see European countries trying to maintain some sort of a pragmatic approach to the relationship with Beijing moving forward. Now, how likely that is going to be successful in the next few years is going to be something to watch.
And finally, before I let you go, Meia, cannot not talk about the United States of America. So let's zoom out a little and look at how keenly DC watches developments between China and any other part of the world, particularly President Xi Jinping's visits. And in that, this visit also being very, very keenly watched and monitored. What do you think the agenda or the purpose of this visit is? Is it to see a fractured, divided Europe where China can consolidate its position and weaken the Western bloc, whether it's the United States of America's foothold presence in Europe, or for that matter, even within Europe, which is quite divided as we see?
Of course, a key strategy for Beijing is to divide and seek fractures where those exist and to widen them if possible. Certainly, to create some sort of wedge within the transatlantic alliance also plays into this. And China is quite adept at doing so in certain ways. I mean, yes, Europe has its own policies when it comes to China. They can differ and clash with those of the United States. They're not always aligned in the same ways. But China is very heavily pushing towards Europe this idea of Europe acting as a third pole and echoing back words and narratives like strategic autonomy and China supporting Europe's strategic autonomy. Those words mean slightly different things from Beijing's perspective and from Europe's perspective, but it is certainly, I think, symbolic and representative of how China would like to see Europe move away from the US's policies of export controls and restrictions when it comes to things like the high-tech sector. And that's a message that China is sending to Europe and to Washington, D.C.